The crystal hall of Zerathia fell completely silent when Princess Thalia stepped onto the selection platform for the third time that month. Nobody wanted her. The crowd of assembled nobles shifted uncomfortably as the high priest read the formal declaration. 12 suitors from the most powerful families across 3 star systems had been presented. 12 had politely declined, not because she was ugly or cruel, but because of something far worse in Zerathian culture. She could not sing. On a world where voice was everything, where political power and social status were determined by the complexity and beauty of one's harmonic resonance, a silent princess was worthless. Thalia's throat had been damaged in childhood by a rare viral infection. She could speak in whispers, but she could never produce the layered harmonics that defined Zerathian civilization. Her father, the High Chancellor, sat rigid in his ornate chair, his own voice creating subtle waves of disappointment that rippled through the room. In Zerathian society, even emotions were sung. A young noble from the Crystalline Peaks had been the last to reject her just moments ago. "I seek a mate whose song can blend with mine," he had said, his voice creating beautiful geometric patterns in the air that everyone could see except Thalia. "Forgive me, princess, but silence cannot harmonize." The crowd had hummed agreement, their collective voices creating a symphony of polite rejection. Thalia stood perfectly still, her face composed, but inside she felt the familiar ache of being broken in a world that valued wholeness above all else. She had learned not to cry at these ceremonies anymore. Tears accomplished nothing. The high priest, his voice carrying centuries of tradition, began the closing ritual. "The selection is postponed until more suitable candidates can be found." Translation: "We need to find someone desperate enough to accept a voiceless bride." Thalia turned to leave the platform when a sound cut through the ceremonial humming. Not a song, just a simple word spoken in flat, unmusical Galactic standard. "Wait." Every head turned toward the entrance. Standing in the archway was a human. He wore the simple gray uniform of Earth's diplomatic service, completely out of place among the flowing, color-shifting robes of Zerathian nobility. His name badge read David Chen Cultural Liaison. He was average height for a human, with dark hair and brown eyes that seemed calm despite the hundreds of alien gazes now fixed on him. The high priest's harmonic voice carried confusion and slight offense. "The selection ceremony is for noble bloodlines only. Observers may watch but not participate." David walked forward steadily, his footsteps echoing in the vast hall. Unlike Zerathians who moved with fluid grace, his walk was deliberate and grounded. "I've read your selection protocols," he said clearly. "Any individual of sound mind and good standing may present themselves if they believe they can honor the Union. There's no species restriction in the foundational texts." A wave of shocked harmonics rippled through the crowd. The High Chancellor leaned forward, his voice creating complex patterns of curiosity. "You would bind yourself to our daughter? A human to a Zerathian? This is unprecedented." David stopped at the base of the platform and looked up at Thalia. Their eyes met and she saw something unexpected. Not pity, not calculation, just genuine respect. "Princess Thalia," he said, his voice lacking any musical quality but somehow still pleasant. "I've been stationed on your world for 6 months. I've attended the cultural exhibitions in the City of Echoes. I've studied your people's history, and I've noticed something everyone else seems to miss." The hall went completely silent, even the ambient humming stopped. "Your daughter," David continued, addressing the High Chancellor directly, "has revolutionized your agricultural systems by developing visual communication methods for the farming colonies, where sound doesn't carry well. She's created written protocols that have saved countless lives during emergencies when sonic communication failed. She's built bridges between your world and species who don't communicate through song." He turned back to Thalia. "Everyone here judges her by what she cannot do. I'm more interested in what she can do." The shock in the room was palpable. A human, a species barely a century into space travel, was lecturing Zerathians about their own princess. The High Chancellor's voice carried dangerous harmonics, the kind that preceded punishment. "You dare suggest we have misjudged our own?" David met his gaze steadily. "With respect, High Chancellor, yes. My people have a saying, 'In the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed man is king.' Sometimes being different isn't weakness. It's just a different kind of strength that others haven't learned to value yet." Thalia felt something crack inside her chest, some wall she had built over years of rejection. This strange, tone-deaf human was defending her when her own people would not. The High Chancellor studied David for a long moment, his harmonics unreadable. Then surprisingly, he began to laugh. The sound was beautiful and complex, filling the hall with cascading notes. "A human teaches us perspective," he sang, amusement and respect mixing in his voice. "Very well, David Chen of Earth, do you understand what you ask? A Zorathian bonding is permanent. You would learn our ways, adopt our customs, and bind your life to hers for as long as you both live." David nodded seriously. "I understand, and I accept those terms if the princess accepts me." Every eye turned to Thalia. She stood frozen, unable to produce the traditional acceptance harmony. In the past, her silence had meant rejection. Now it meant something else entirely. She looked at David, this human who had just upended centuries of tradition for a woman he barely knew. And she did something she had never done in a selection ceremony. She smiled. Then she descended the platform, walked to David, and placed her hand over her heart in the traditional gesture of acceptance. The gesture alone without song should have been incomplete. But David, who had clearly studied their customs, placed his own hand over his heart and said clearly, "I accept your acceptance, Princess Thalia, and I promise to honor you not despite your silence, but including it." The crowd erupted in shocked harmonics. The High Priest looked frantically at the High Chancellor, who simply waved his hand in acceptance. "If my daughter has chosen and the human has volunteered, then let the bonding preparations begin," he sang, his voice carrying notes of both amusement and cautious hope. The next weeks were chaos. Traditionalists protested. Political factions scrambled to understand the implications. Earth's government sent urgent messages asking if David was acting under some kind of alien influence. Through it all, Thalia and David spent time together, learning about each other under the watchful eyes of countless cultural advisors. Thalia learned that humans were incredibly short-lived compared to Zorathians, with lifespans barely reaching a century. That they communicated through flat, unmusical speech that most Zorathians found grating. That their homeworld was considered primitive by galactic standards. But she also discovered that humans created visual art with a passion that rivaled Zorathian song, that they had literature spanning thousands of years, that they valued diversity in ways her people had forgotten. David in turn learned about Zorathian harmonics, about how their entire civilization was built on sonic resonance, about the social complexity of a species that could literally hear each other's emotional states through voice alone. One evening, as they walked through the gardens of resonance where crystalline plants chimed softly in the wind, Thalia used her tablet to type a question. "Why did you really volunteer? You could have any human partner." "Why choose someone so different?" David read the message and smiled. 3 months ago, I was observing a children's education program. You were there, teaching young Zorathians who had various vocal impairments. The other teachers used traditional song methods and grew frustrated when the children couldn't keep up. But you taught them using colors, using touch, using every method except sound. And you know what? Those children learned faster than any of the traditional classes. He paused, looking at the glowing plants around them. You weren't teaching in spite of being voiceless. You were teaching because of it. You understood what they needed in ways the other teachers never could. And I thought, that's someone worth knowing. That's someone worth choosing. Thalia felt tears gathering in her eyes. She typed quickly. I thought my silence made me useless. David shook his head firmly. Your silence makes you see the world differently. That's valuable. My people learned long ago that diversity isn't weakness, it's strength. Different perspectives, different abilities, they all add to the whole. She looked at him for a long moment, then typed something new. I accept you, David Chen. Not because you're my only option, but because you see me as I truly am. He took her hand gently. And I see someone remarkable. The bonding ceremony took place during the Festival of Twin Moons, when Zorathia's 2 satellites aligned perfectly. The traditional ceremony required the couple to create a harmonic blend, their voices intertwining in perfect synchronization. Obviously, that was impossible. Instead, David proposed something different. He had spent weeks learning Zorathian musical notation and had commissioned human musicians to create a composition. When the moment came, instead of singing, he played a recording. Human instruments, violins and cellos and piano created a melody. It wasn't Zorathian harmonics. It was something else entirely. And into that melody Thalia added her contribution. She had learned to play the Zorathian crystalline chimes, instruments that required no voice, only precise touch. Her chimes wove through David's music, creating something entirely new. Not traditional, not expected, but beautiful. The crowd listened in stunned silence. Then slowly harmonics of approval began to fill the hall. The High Chancellor himself sang a blessing, his voice carrying notes of pride that Thalia had never heard directed at her before. When the ceremony concluded, they were bonded, not in the traditional way, but in a way that honored both their natures. David felt Thalia's hand squeeze his as they stood together, and he squeezed back. No words needed, no song required, just understanding. The celebration afterward was subdued compared to traditional bondings, but Thalia didn't care. She stood with David on the palace balcony, looking out over the city of echoes where sonic sculptures created visible patterns in the air. David watched the light show with fascination. "It's beautiful," he said softly. Thalia typed on her tablet. "So is your world's art. I've been studying Earth's museums through your databanks. Your species creates beauty without sound. I never imagined such a thing was possible." He smiled. "We'll visit Earth someday. I'll show you the Grand Canyon, the Aurora Borealis, the Great Barrier Reef. Things that don't sing but still take your breath away." She nodded, then typed something else. "What happens now?" "Now," David said, "we prove everyone wrong. We show them that silence and sound can work together. That different doesn't mean lesser." Over the following months, they did exactly that. Thalia took on diplomatic roles that had previously been considered impossible for her. With David's help bridging communication gaps, she became an invaluable liaison to species that didn't use sonic communication. Her ability to think outside traditional Zorathian methods made her perfect for solving problems others couldn't. David's position as a human bonded to Zorathian royalty gave him unique insights that helped Earth-Zorathia relations flourish. Together, they created new protocols for cross-species communication that benefited the entire sector. 1 year after the selection, the High Chancellor summoned them to his private chamber. His harmonics were warm and welcoming as they entered. "I was wrong about you, daughter," he sang, his voice creating patterns of humble blue and gold. "I spent so long seeing your silence as a flaw that I failed to see it as a gift. You perceive the universe in ways I cannot." Thalia's eyes widened. She had never heard her father admit error. He turned to David. "And you, humans, saw what we were blind to. You recognize that there are many ways to be strong, many ways to contribute. For that I am grateful." David bowed respectfully. "Your daughter was always remarkable, High Chancellor. She just needed someone to recognize it." The Chancellor's harmonics shifted to amused appreciation. "Indeed. When I eventually step down, I believe our world will be in excellent hands, both Zorathian and human." Later, in their quarters, Thalia and David sat together in comfortable silence. She typed on her tablet. "Do you ever regret it? Choosing the voiceless princess?" David pulled her close, and through their bond she could feel his contentment, his certainty. "Never, not for one moment. You're my greatest adventure, Thalia, my best decision." She turned in his arms, tears of joy streaming down her face. She typed one more message. "They thought no one would choose the broken princess. But I wasn't broken. I was just different, and you were brave enough to see that." David wiped her tears gently. "You were never broken. You were always whole. The world just needed to adjust its definition." Above them, the twin moons rose in perfect alignment, just as they had on their bonding night. 2 different worlds, 2 different species, coming together not despite their differences but because of them. In the great selection hall where 12 suitors had rejected Princess Thalia, things began to change. Other Zorathians with vocal impairments, those who had hidden in shame, began to step forward. Artists and engineers and scientists who communicated differently found new respect. The culture that had valued only song for millennia began to make room for other forms of expression. All because one princess refused to be defined by her limitations, and one human had the courage to choose her. The selection that should have been Thalia's 3rd humiliation had instead become her greatest triumph. And across Zorathia, a quiet revolution began, not through song but through understanding. Because sometimes the greatest changes come not from those who sing the loudest, but from those who listen most carefully. David Chen had listened. Princess Thalia had been heard, and together they proved that love doesn't require perfect harmony. Sometimes it just requires someone willing to appreciate a different kind of music. In the kingdom of endless song, the voiceless princess and the tone-deaf human built something beautiful. Not a melody, not a harmony, but something uniquely their own. And that, as humans say, made all the difference.